He told me I'd be homeless, with the same mouth that used to ask me for lunch money. It was Friday, November 7th, a cold Cleveland morning that smelled of iron and wet leaves. I was standing in the kitchen of my small bungalow on West 112th, the one I built with Ellen before cancer took her. My son, Connor, walked in wearing a pressed coat and that smug grin he'd perfected since becoming COO of Halloran Fabrication, the company I built from scratch 25 years ago. He didn't even knock. He just marched in and slapped a stack of glossy papers on the counter. "Dad," he said, "you can't keep freeloading on the company's dime. It's time to sell the house before winter hits." Freeloading. The word hit like a wrench to the chest. The house wasn't company property. It was my home, my retirement. Every brick in its foundation was paid for with years of 14-hour shifts, cut palms, and missed birthdays. He flipped through a presentation marked Leadership Reset Q4 Strategy. His consultant, a woman named Mara Kent, had filled it with buzzwords: optimization, modernization, executive reallocation. Beneath all that corporate perfume was the real message: me out. I stared at the mortgage statement under my coffee mug, $18,276 left to pay. Connor tapped it with his pen. "You should rent. Downsizing suits your age." He laughed like it was a joke, but the silence after told me it wasn't. "Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from." I asked him if he remembered the nights I'd sleep on the shop floor, welding steel brackets until sunrise just so payroll cleared. He shrugged. "Things change, Dad. You built something good, but it's time to professionalize it," I said quietly. "You mean privatize it? Into your name." He smiled and sipped his coffee from my wife's blue mug, the same one Ellen used every morning. "You'll thank me later. It's not personal." Then he stood, dropped my old office badge on the table and said, "Keys change Monday." When he left, the furnace clicked on, but the house didn't warm. I sat there staring at that mug. On my phone, a text lit up from Connor at 11:23 a.m. "Winter's expensive. Sell the house or move out." I took a photo of that text, slid the phone beside the folded mortgage slip, and unlocked the small safe under the pantry floorboard. Inside was a thin folder Ellen helped me set up in 2018, the Revocable Living Trust. My name still controlled 62% of Halloran Fabrication's voting shares. Connor thought I was just the retired old man living off company scraps. He had no idea who still owned the ground under his feet. "You'll be homeless." His words followed me into the night like a draft under a locked door. I didn't sleep much after Friday. November 7th. The furnace kicked on at 2:11 a.m., rattling the vent in the hallway, but the rooms stayed cold. I pulled Ellen's grey shawl over my shoulders and sat at the kitchen table with the Revocable Living Trust open beneath the yellow pendant light. Her blue mug sat to my right, empty. I traced my finger over the line that mattered, 62% voting control, and felt the sting of being treated like a guest in a house I'd bled for. On the counter, the mortgage slip whispered its number, $18,276 left, and I whispered back, "Not selling." By Saturday, November 8th, frost laced the porch rail. I scraped the windshield with a paint scraper because I'd misplaced the actual one, and drove to Halloran Fabrication on West 65th, the plant that still smelled like coolant and hot metal. I didn't badge in. I stood outside the loading dock and watched second shift wrap stainless assemblies with the same care you'd wrap a new baby. The bay door lifted enough for Tom Nguyen, foreman steady as bedrock, to spot me. "Rob," he said, coming out in his flannel with a clipboard tucked under his arm. He looked over his shoulder before speaking softly. "Something's off. Connor's been reclassifying." He handed me a photocopy, grimy at the corner. 3 names, 3 lines of OT, Reg G, the difference boxed in pen. "Happened Wednesday, no 5. He told payroll it was a pilot efficiency thing," Tom said. His eyes were apologetic, like he was guilty for telling me the truth. "Guys are nervous about Christmas." Inside, the plant clock read 4:02 p.m. Somewhere a ratchet clicked and a radio hummed an old Springsteen song about working men. I nodded and told Tom thanks, that I wasn't there to make drama. "You built this place," he said. "People remember." I found Anita Reyes in HR, lights low, a cardigan thrown over her chair like a surrender flag. She slid 2 sealed envelopes across her desk without a word. The return address lines were blank, but I recognized careful block letters from the floor, harassment by management and overtime shorted. She tapped a drawer with chipped pink nail polish. Badge logs too, she said. Connor's been entering late and changing time cards 15 minutes later. She hesitated. I don't want to be in the middle, Rob, but I'm not going to be part of something dirty. I nodded. You won't be. Thank you. On the bulletin board outside HR, a fresh flyer announced Efficiency Sprint Novi 10 Dec 8. In small print, holiday bonuses tied to compliance. Grace periods suspended through year end. It sounded like a holiday spirit until you read it twice. Suspended grace periods meant docked pay the week before Christmas. Back in my truck, I closed the door and silence pressed in. My breath fogged the glass. I pressed record on my phone, voice memo 178, and said quietly, Ellen, I'm going to handle this the right way. My throat tightened on right. Outside, a forklift beeped in slow, patient bursts. I wiped my eyes with the heel of my hand at 4:12 p.m. and stared at my hands, scars like pale commas across my knuckles, little punctuation marks on a life that still needed an ending. At home, I made dinner the way she used to when money was thin. Tomato soup stretched with milk, a grilled cheese cut diagonal. I ate standing up at the stove, the way I did when I couldn't bear the quiet of the table. The shawl still smelled faintly like her lavender soap. I set the soup spoon down on a folded paper towel and pulled the trust folder from the safe again. On a legal pad, I wrote at the top in block letters, Ledger. Under it, I made neat headings with a carpenter's pencil. Money, operating account Winters around $1.2 million. Mortgage $18,276. Proposed $85,000 growth advisory fee to Kent Advisory Partners. Rumored overtime shorted cluster. $1,400 keys and locks. My physical plant key on brass ring. My 2FA token to the trustee portal. Connor dropped my old badge but said, keys change Monday. Receipts docs trust 2018. Shareholder agreement 2019 with 4 cause definitions. Mortgage slip. Connor's 11:23 a.m. text, sell the house or move out. HR envelopes. Tom's OT copy. Bulletin flyer, devices, my old iPhone. HR's conference recorder. Plant DVR if preserved, allies. Tom Foreman. Anita, HR. Mark Dwyer, CPA, Ellen's brother. Frank Delaney, corporate counsel. Timeline. Fry Nov 7. Insult, text. Sat Nov 8, plant visit. Sun Nov 9, prep. 1 Nov 10, lawyer. I underlined timeline twice. The pencil tore the paper a little. That night, grief felt like a room I kept walking into by mistake. Everywhere I looked, Connor's voice echoed, you'll be homeless. And then softer from some older year, a boy's voice asking if he could borrow $5 for nachos after practice. I wanted to be angry at him for what he'd become, but the anger collapsed under years of trying to be a good father. I thought of the first time I put his small hand on a welder's shoulder, how he flinched at the sparks and then smiled when he realized they were just light, not danger. I took a shower as the clock rolled to 9:37 p.m., steam fogging the mirror. With a finger, I drew a box on the glass and wrote 62% inside it like a reminder to myself. When the fog faded, the box went with it, but the number stayed in my head on Sunday, Nov 9. I drove past St. Malachi's and sat in the back for the 10 a.m. Mass because that's what Ellen would have done when things looked crooked. I'm not a crusader. I'm a man who keeps ledgers. When the service ended, I lit a candle, $2 in the box, receipt folded in my pocket like a promise, and went home to lay out the week. I lined the kitchen table with everything. Trust on the left, shareholder agreement on top, HR envelopes unopened at center, mortgage slip on the right, Connor's text printed from my phone, and clipped to the top of a folder with a black binder clip. I opened a new folder, blue, and with painter's tape made a crooked label, DEC 9, 9 good AM. I slid a sticky note inside. Special meeting. Notice by counsel. Preserve logs. At 5:06 p.m., I dialed Mark. He picked up on the second ring with the background sound of a Browns pre-game show. "You ready for Monday?" he asked, as if we'd already had the conversation in some earlier life. I told him the numbers, the $85,000 proposal, the OT edits. He exhaled. "I'll pull bank statements and last quarter's approvals. We do this by the book, Robbie. No shouting matches." "By the book," I said, and wrote it at the bottom of the ledger. I set an alarm for 7:15 a.m. Monday, placed the trust back in the safe and left the blue DEC-9 folder on the table where I'd see it first thing. The house was still cold, but a different kind of cold now, clear, bracing, like the air you breathe right before the first cut of a workday. I turned off the light and stood a moment in the doorway, listening to the furnace settle and the faraway hiss of traffic on I-90. I wasn't going to sell my house. I wasn't going to be homeless. And on Monday, Nov 10, I would stop being quiet. If you want to keep a secret, print it and hide it in a blue folder. Monday, November 10th, 8:32 a.m. I sat in attorney Frank Delaney's office in downtown Cleveland, the same building where I'd signed the company's first bank loan back in 2000. The lobby smelled like dust and lemon polish. Frank adjusted his glasses, scanned the trust document, and tapped the corner with his Mont Blanc. "You've got control, Rob, quiet control. The best kind." He circled one clause in red pencil. "Majority trustee retains board voting authority unless deemed incapacitated by court order." "That means," he said, "until you're declared dead or senile, your son's just an employee, no matter what title he prints on a business card." I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Frank flipped a legal pad around so I could see the heading he'd written in bold. "Special meeting, Deck 9, 9 a.m. Get your documentation in line. HR complaints, payroll edits, investor emails. You don't tell them what's coming. You show them. Paper beats talk." When I left his office, snow flurries were already swirling over the Cuyahoga. I drove straight to the plant, heart steady now, and found Anita in HR, shutting down her computer. "If I were to request the last month of badge logs," I said softly, "would that be unusual?" She blinked once, then nodded toward her drawer. You might find them under workforce optimization. Novia, just saying. Back home, I laid the printouts across the table. Connor clocking in late 10:47 a.m. Edits done by 10:59. 2 efficiency meetings added after hours, but marked as billable to corporate. Then came the $85,000 wire draft to Kent Advisory Partners. Mark had already emailed me screenshots from the QuickBooks portal. Connor had prepped it, but never got final authorization. At 3:12 p.m., I texted Connor, proud of the new investor talk. "Let's align on year-end budgets before winter shutdown." "Dicknov." He replied 5 minutes later, "Sure, bring your grocery receipts and retirement dreams." I took a photo of that text, printed it, and slipped it under a sticky note labeled Evidence Tone. Every night that week, I added something to the ledger. Monday, badge logs. Tuesday, payroll exports. Wednesday, bank wire attempt. Thursday, HR affidavit draft from Anita. Friday, foreman's statement on safety halt ignored by Connor. Dated Nov 3. Each item went into a blue folder labeled Deck 9, 9 juice a.m. The stack grew heavy enough that the old table groaned when I moved it. On Friday, November 14th, I stopped by the plant again. The air smelled of burnt coffee and cold metal. Tom Nguyen handed me a flash drive. "Security DVR last 2 weeks," he said quietly. "I made a copy before the overwrite cycle. Might want to look at Nov 5th around 6 p.m. That night I plugged it in. The footage showed Connor and Mara in the conference room, laughing, wine glasses clinking. Then Connor leaned over her laptop saying, "Once Dad's out, it's clean. He's still got the trust, but we'll handle that." Mara's voice, "Then it's all optics. Vote him senile." I froze the frame. His mouth open mid-laugh, Mara's hand brushing his arm. For a second I didn't feel anger. I felt pity. He'd let greed turn him into someone who forgot, who gave him his first paycheck. By Sunday, Nov the 16th, I had everything catalogued, digital and physical. Frank called mid-afternoon. I filed the preliminary notice for the special meeting. Legally sound. They'll get calendar invites this week. What should I expect? I asked. A show, he said. They'll bluff, posture, maybe threaten a PR move. Don't bite. Just present the facts and let the paperwork do the talking. That night, I placed Ellen's blue mug beside the blue folder. A kind of symmetry. The house was quiet, but not hollow anymore. Like a shop at midnight after the last weld, humming faintly with power still running through the wires, I whispered to the empty room, "You wanted to see power, son? You will. Every act of revenge begins with paperwork. Mine started with a blue folder and a steady hand." Monday, November 17th, the first snowstorm hit Cleveland. By sunrise, the street outside my bungalow was white and silent, like the world had paused to listen. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee, staring at the folder labeled Deck 9, 9 a.m. Inside it were copies of everything that mattered. Badge logs, pay edits, bank drafts, the investor decks, and my trust deed. Every page told the same story. My son was dismantling my life, one efficiency at a time. At 9:30 a.m., I met Mark Dwyer, my brother-in-law and CPA, at his office downtown. He had already printed 3 binders, one for me, one for Frank Delaney the lawyer, and one labeled Board Distribution, each section tabbed with red post-its: financial misconduct, breach of agreement, trust retention. "Connor doesn't know it yet," Mark said, sliding the binders across his desk. "But by signing these quarterly statements, he already confessed on paper. He opened to a line item from October 23rd, advisory services, Kent Partners, $85,000, pending approval. No board vote, no resolution, and billed as growth consultation during a net loss quarter. That's breach of fiduciary duty." He looked at me over his glasses. "If this goes to court, he's finished, but I didn't want court. I wanted understanding. I wanted my son to see what greed had made of him." That evening I visited the plant again. I wore my old Halloran jacket, blue, frayed at the cuffs, the name patch barely hanging on. The place still felt like mine. Tom Nguyen met me by the tool cages, whispering, "He's been locking files, cutting overtime more." He handed me a folded slip, an updated complaint from 2 welders whose pay had been reduced. Each signature trembled in ballpoint ink. I took a photo and told Tom, "You've done enough. Keep your head down. HR will handle it." At 6:05 p.m., I parked across from Connor's office window. Lights still on. He was pacing, phone in hand, voice sharp even through the glass. He slammed the desk once, then smiled suddenly, the same grin he had when he won his first high school debate. I remembered that day. Ellen had cried because she said he was going to change the world. I thought maybe he did, just not the way we hoped. The next morning, I began assembling the timeline binder. Every detail logged precisely. Novi 7, Connor's threat and text, "Sell the house or move out." Nov 8, plant visit, OT reclassification proof. Nov 10, council consultation. Meeting notice draft. Nov 11-14, HR. Affidavits and financial discrepancies. Nov 16, DVR. Footage confirmation. I stapled a photo of the trust's cover sheet to the front and labeled it Control Ledger, Exhibit A by Nov 18. Frank Delaney filed the official notice of special meeting under Section 4.3 of the shareholder agreement. Copies went to all board members, including Connor. He called me that afternoon. "Dad, what is this?" He barked. "A meeting notice? Are you serious?" I kept my voice calm. "You wanted transparency, son. We're aligning on budgets, remember?" He laughed, short, disbelieving. "This is some stunt. You think you're still in charge?" "Not think," I said quietly. "No." The silence that followed was long enough to hear the hum of the refrigerator behind me. Then he hung up. That evening, I received a text from Mara Kent. "Robert, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Let's have lunch and talk about optics before the board meeting. We're all family here," I didn't reply. I printed it and filed it under Exhibit B, Optics. By Friday, Nov 21, snow lined the gutters like chalk outlines. I stood in the plant parking lot watching shift workers leave in pairs, collars up against the wind. I realized that what I was doing wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about cleaning something that had gone rotten. Inside my truck, I recorded another voice memo 184. Connor thinks I'm fighting him. I'm not. I'm fighting for the company, for Ellen, for every man in that plant who earns his pay the honest way. The next morning, I printed that memo's transcript and slid it into the back of the blue folder. One last edition. Everything was now aligned: witnesses, proof, counsel, dates. The boardroom ambush was officially set in motion. All that was left was to let Connor walk right into it. By the week before Thanksgiving, Cleveland felt like it was holding its breath. Snow kept melting and refreezing, leaving the streets glazed in silence. The kind of silence that happens before something snaps. Monday, November 24th, I woke to an email notification. Subject line, Special Meeting Notice. The reply was from Connor Halloran, sent at 1:12 a.m. Dad, I'm not playing your games. You're confused. I'm the acting COO, and everyone knows it. Cancel this nonsense before it embarrasses you. Below his signature, Mara's name appeared, but she had been CC'd. I printed the email, circled her inclusion, and wrote in red pen, Chain of Influence. Then I placed it into the blue folder. At 9 a.m. I met with Frank Delaney in his office. He'd already anticipated the pushback. They'll try intimidation first, he said, sipping his coffee. Then sentimentality. Then they'll underestimate you. He slid a letter across the desk, an official reminder notice confirming the Deck 9 meeting, legally binding and time-stamped. This goes out today. If he refuses attendance, we hold it in absentia. Driving home, I replayed Connor's voice in my head. You'll be homeless. The echo had changed shape. It didn't sound like a threat anymore. It sounded like a challenge. That night, my brother-in-law Mark called. Got the Q4 numbers, he said. And guess what? They've been inflating accounts receivable by $147,000 using pending invoices. It's not illegal yet, but close enough to hang him in a board meeting. I pulled a notebook closer. Paper trail? Clean, Mark said. Time-stamped. You're covered. I jotted it into the ledger. Inflated AR, 147K, Novi 14 entries, forensic copy saved. On Wednesday, North 26, 2 days before Thanksgiving, he drove to the plant with a thermos of soup and a purpose. Workers were packing up early, the shop floor echoing with tinny Christmas music. Tom Nguyen waved me over. They're saying layoffs coming in January, he said. Connor's blaming you. Says you froze accounts. He's half right, I replied quietly. But no one's losing their job. Not if we fix this right. Tom looked relieved, but his eyes carried the worry of a man who'd seen too many owners break promises. I shook his hand and told him, keep the team steady till Christmas. Things will settle. That night, I drove past Connor's townhouse in Lakewood. His Tesla sat in the driveway, windows lit blue from the TV inside. Through the curtains, I could see him pacing again, gesturing with his hands like a CEO in his own movie. I thought about walking up, ringing the bell, saying something, anything, but I didn't. Some lessons only sink in when life delivers them. On Thanksgiving morning, the neighborhood smelled of roasted turkey and chimney smoke. My own table was empty, except for the blue folder, the binder of financials, and a single plate of mashed potatoes I made out of habit. I whispered a small grace, for work, for home, for justice. At 11:20 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Mara. Robert, you're alienating Connor. Family shouldn't turn corporate. He's hurt, I typed back, then deleted my reply. She wanted weakness, a hint that I'd bend. But I'd already learned something. Silence unnerves manipulators more than anger ever could. That afternoon, I printed a photo of Ellen, her standing outside the old plant in 2005, welding mask pushed up, smiling at me through the steam. I slipped it into the front of the binder, under the transparent cover. Every good fight needs a reason. That was mine. The following Monday, December 1st, the first board RSVP came in, from Anita Reyes confirming attendance. Then Mark, then Frank in his role as legal counsel. Connor and Mara didn't respond. That was fine. The rules were on my side now. December 3rd, I received an anonymous email from a plant account titled Careful. The body read, "He's transferring files to his laptop. Might erase logs." I forwarded it to Frank, who replied, "Already anticipated. Preservation notice served yesterday. He's trapped." That night I went to the garage and opened Ellen's old cedar box. Inside were her small keepsakes, a dried corsage, her union badge, and a letter she once wrote when Connor was born. I unfolded it slowly. Her handwriting said, "Teach him kindness, even when he mistakes it for weakness." I whispered, "I did, Elle," but he stopped listening. I placed the letter inside the blue folder as the final piece. The evidence was airtight. The emotions? Steady. The storm? Scheduled. 9 days to the meeting. 9 days until my son learned what ownership really meant. Every December the factory ran quieter. But this year, silence wasn't peace. It was pressure. Tuesday, December 9th, 8:11 a.m. I stood in front of the mirror, knotting the same dark tie I'd worn at Ellen's funeral. I hadn't touched it since. Outside, snow fell sideways across West 112th Street, catching on the mailbox. The house hummed with the sound of the furnace fighting the cold, the same rhythm that had kept me company through every long night of planning. I poured coffee into Ellen's blue mug, then lifted the blue folder from the kitchen table. Inside were 12 tabs of truth, time cards, wire drafts, trust certificates, emails, and photos. Each one was a nail in a coffin Connor built himself. At 8:37 a.m., my phone buzzed. Connor, running late. Might move meeting. Weather's bad. Me, already on my way. I left the house, locked the door twice, and drove toward the Halloran Fabrication corporate office on West 65th. Snow whipped against the windshield like static. By the time I pulled into the parking lot, the asphalt looked like uncut marble. Through the glass lobby doors, I could see Mara Kent waiting by reception. Clipboard in hand, her lips pressed into a perfect smile. Connor stood beside her, suit immaculate, talking to 2 junior managers I didn't recognize. The minute he saw me, that smile faltered just a hair, but I caught it. "Dad," he said, adjusting his cufflinks. "Glad you made it. We'll keep this quick. The team's busy." I looked him dead in the eye. "Then let's not waste time." Inside the boardroom, the heat was set too high. The long mahogany table gleamed under fluorescent light. Anita Reyes, Mark Dwyer, and Frank Delaney were already seated, binders neatly arranged. At the center sat a glass water pitcher reflecting the blue of the winter sky. Connor started first, pacing like he owned the air. "Look, everyone knows my father's been distant. The company needs modernization. New capital. I've engaged an advisory firm, Kent Partners, to secure investors. The old structure doesn't fit anymore." He gestured toward Mara, who rose gracefully. "With your permission, I'd like to present projected returns for—" Frank raised a hand. "Before we proceed, there's a procedural matter," Connor frowned. "What matter?" "Voting control," Frank said evenly. "Under the 2018 Revocable Living Trust, majority authority remains with the founder, Mr. Robert Halloran. This meeting was called pursuant to Section 4.3 of the Shareholder Agreement. Today's agenda includes the review of financial irregularities and proposed executive reassignment." The words "executive reassignment" hung in the air like smoke. Mara's smile froze. Connor blinked once, then twice. "This is absurd. You can't—" I slid the blue folder across the table. Page 3, Connor. Payroll edits dated Nov 5. 3 employees had overtime erased. Page 6. Unapproved wire draft for $85,000 to your consultant here. Page 9. DVR still of you two in this room, discussing how to declare me incapacitated. His jaw tightened. "That's illegal surveillance." Tom Nguyen's affidavit was already clipped beside the photo. "Facility cameras are company property," Frank replied. "Legally admissible." Connor slammed his palm on the table. "You can't embarrass me like this in front of staff." "Son," I said quietly, "you embarrassed yourself the moment you chose greed over legacy." Mara tried to interject, her voice smooth but cracking at the edges. "Robert, surely this can be handled privately." I cut her off. Privately? You planned a coup in my own company. I turned to Anita. Please read the HR grievances. Anita's voice shook, but she read anyway. Employees Martinez and Collins report overtime, tampering and verbal intimidation by COO C. Halloran. Connor stepped back, color draining. Dad, they're lying. You know how people exaggerate when they— Stop, I said. I built this place so men like them could feed their families. I won't let my own son starve them for a bonus. Frank tapped his pen. All evidence considered, the board moves to a vote on executive reassignment per clause 4.5. Mr. Halloran, as majority trustee, your vote decides. The room went still. Outside, the storm pressed against the windows like applause. I looked at my son, his expensive suit, his manicured confidence cracking, and felt something twist inside me. For a second, I saw the kid who used to fall asleep in my truck after Little League. Dirt on his shoes, pride in his smile. Then I remembered November 7th. His voice cold as steel. You'll be homeless, I said softly. Connor Michael Halloran, I hereby revoke your executive authority effective immediately. You're suspended pending full financial audit. His chair screeched backward. You can't fire me. I'm your son, I stood. And I'm your father. Not your employee. He stared at me, then at Mara. You said he couldn't. Mara gathered her papers, face pale. You didn't tell me about the trust. Connor turned red, stammering. It was supposed to be final, I finished for him. Yes, it is. Frank signed the resolution, slid it across for my signature, then Anita's and Mark's. The pen scratched slow and steady, the sound loud as thunder in that room. When it was done, I pushed the signed document toward Connor. You wanted to run the company. Now you can run your resume. He looked at me one last time, eyes wet but furious. You'll regret this. I shook my head. No, son. I regret what made it necessary. Security entered quietly at Anita's cue. Connor didn't fight them. He just gathered his coat, muttering under his breath, the words small and brittle. When the door closed behind him, the entire room exhaled. Mara followed him out a moment later, her heels clicking down the hallway like the final notes of a bad song. Frank looked at me. It's done. Mark nodded, relief softening his face. Justice, he said simply. I picked up the blue folder, closed it, and held it to my chest for a moment before saying, no, balance. Outside, the snow had stopped falling. The world was still. For the first time in weeks, I felt warm. The next morning, the air in Cleveland felt clearer, like the storm had swept away something heavier than snow. But peace never lasts long after a war, even one fought with paperwork. Wednesday, December 10th, 7:42 a.m. My phone buzzed non-stop. Missed calls, angry texts, and 3 voicemails from Connor, each one shorter and colder than the last. The first was indignant, the second desperate, the third silent, but for a long exhale. I didn't reply. Instead, I drove to the plant. The guard at the gate, Harvey, raised his thermos in greeting. Morning, Mr. Halloran. Heard things got lively yesterday. I smiled faintly. Just a company realignment, Harvey. Inside, the air smelled of metal dust and diesel, a scent I'd missed. Workers nodded as I passed, some pretending not to look, some whispering. One man, Collins, the welder whose overtime had been erased, stepped forward and shook my hand. Would you handled business, sir? Thank you. That sir hit harder than any insult Connor had ever thrown. Not pride, gratitude. Honest gratitude. Upstairs in HR, Anita had already printed the new org chart. Connor's access revoked. Payroll restored. Bonuses backdated, she said, eyes tired but bright. On her desk sat a cardboard box labeled Personal Effects, C. Halloran. Inside were a mug, a framed photo of him and Mara at a conference, and a half-empty bottle of cologne. I stared at it for a second, remembering when Ellen had bought him his first aftershave for prom. She said, every man should smell like he has purpose. Funny how things echo. At 11:10 a.m., Frank Delaney called from his office. They've retained counsel, he said. Mara's firm is threatening a defamation suit. Nothing sticks. We've got all the filings clean and time-stamped. I exhaled. Let them bark, he chuckled. That's the spirit. By the afternoon, the story had already begun to ripple through town. Cleveland's small business circles thrive on gossip. Halloran Sr. takes back control. Son ousted after audit. Consultant scandal pending investigation. Every headline carried the same undertone. The old man still had teeth, but revenge, even righteous revenge, always leaves a shadow. That evening I returned home to my quiet kitchen. The blue folder sat on the table like an exhausted soldier. I opened it one last time, not to gloat, but to remind myself what had been necessary. The printed text messages, the signatures, the affidavits, all proof of what greed could make of love. My phone buzzed again at 8:19 p.m. Connor. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. Dad, he said, voice low, raw. You didn't have to humiliate me like that. I didn't humiliate you, I said quietly. I stopped you from destroying yourself. You think you're a hero now. You've ruined me. No, Connor. You ruined what you were becoming. There's a difference. Silence stretched between us, the kind that comes when both sides finally realize the fight is over. I could hear him breathing, maybe crying. Then he said, barely audible, Mom would have hated you for this. That one cut deeper than I expected. I stared at her photo on the wall, taken before chemo, her eyes calm and forgiving. Maybe, I said softly, but she would have hated what you did even more. He hung up without another word. For a long time, I just sat there, the house creaking in the wind, furnace humming. I thought about every parent who gives too much, forgives too quickly, and learns too late that kindness without boundaries becomes an invitation for betrayal. I opened the back door, stepped out into the cold. The snow had crusted into glassy ridges, moonlight glinting off them. In the distance, the factory's lights still burned faintly through the haze. My legacy intact, I whispered to the night. You said I'd be homeless, son, but you were the one who lost his home today. Then I went back inside, shut off the kitchen light, and slid the blue folder into the safe. Not out of spite, but preservation. Some truths need to be stored where time can't rewrite them. Justice had been served. But justice, I realized, never feels like victory. Only balance restored after too long leaning the wrong way. It's strange how justice sounds nothing like triumph. It sounds like quiet, like the furnace cycling off after weeks of running too hot. 3 days after the meeting, Friday, December 12th, I stood outside the factory at sunrise. The air was sharp enough to sting. The bay doors rolled open, and I watched the welders file in one by one. There was laughter again. Real laughter. The kind that had disappeared when Connor started calling them cost units. Tom Nguyen came up beside me with 2 paper cups of coffee. Morning, boss, he said. I corrected him. Not boss. Just owner again, he grinned. Either way, it's good having you back around. Inside, the hum of machinery returned, steady as a heartbeat. Anita was in HR reviewing new safety protocols, while Mark and Frank were finalizing Connor's exit paperwork. Full separation, no litigation, Frank said when he called at 10:03 a.m. He's signing the release. We're closing the chapter clean. That word mattered. By noon, I was sitting at the same desk where Ellen used to balance our books back in 2001. I found a photo of her tucked behind the filing cabinet, dusty, faded, smiling next to a younger me. I brushed it off and propped it upright. We made it, Elle, I whispered. At 1:45 p.m., Mara Kent's firm issued a public statement. Kent Advisory Partners no longer affiliated with Halloran Fabrication. Previous engagements terminated amicably. That was lawyer language, for we ran and hoped no one noticed. Later that afternoon, Connor's car pulled up outside the factory. I saw him from my office window, standing there in the snow, hands deep in his pockets, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. For a moment I thought he might come inside. Instead, he walked to the corner, glanced up at the old Halloran sign, then turned away and drove off. I didn't chase him. Some distances heal only when left alone. That night, I sat by the window with a glass of bourbon and my ledger open. On the last page, under timeline, I wrote one final entry. Deck 12, peace restored. Then I closed it, slid it back into the safe, and locked it. People think revenge feels like fire, like some explosion of justice. But standing there in that dim kitchen, I realized it feels more like closing a valve after years of pressure. The sound isn't an explosion, it's a release. At 9:20 p.m., I received an email from an unknown address. Subject line, "Thank you." The message was short. "It's Connor. I'm getting help. I was wrong. Mom would have been proud of you. See." I read it 3 times, then sat back, eyes wet, breath unsteady. I didn't reply. Not yet. Justice had been served, but forgiveness, that was something different. That takes time. I poured the rest of the bourbon into the sink, rinsed the glass, and turned off the lights. The house creaked softly, like it too was settling after a long fight. Standing in the doorway, I looked toward the distant factory lights and whispered, "You didn't lose me, son. You just gave me away." Then I shut the door, locked it once, and finally went to bed without the weight of fear on my chest. Justice doesn't end the story. It just quiets the noise long enough for you to hear what's left inside. A week passed after Connor's email. Cleveland thawed a little, roads cleared, and the plant hummed through its winter schedule. I didn't step in much, just stopped by once a day to watch the welders work, to hear the rhythm of progress returning to its rightful owners. Monday, December 15th, I stood outside the building watching steam rise from the vents, like breath from a living thing. That plant wasn't just a company, it was my life's heartbeat forged in steel and sweat. I'd built it with Ellen, lost her to time, almost lost it to pride. But I hadn't lost myself. Inside, Anita handed me a stack of thank you cards. "They pooled together for a holiday dinner fund," she said with a smile. I opened one. It read, "Thanks for remembering who we are." I nodded quietly. That was all the applause I'd ever need. I went home early, sunlight already thinning into dusk. The house was warm now, furnace humming with its usual rhythm. On the table sat Ellen's blue mug, washed and gleaming. I hadn't moved it since the day Connor came by with his leadership reset. And funny how symbols survive longer than people expect. I made a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching flakes drift past the streetlight. For the first time in months, I didn't check my phone. I didn't open any files or review ledgers. I just listened, to the quiet, to the ticking of the wall clock, to my own breathing settling into peace. I thought about Connor, about how greed often begins as insecurity wearing a fancy coat. He wanted approval, not power, and he mistook one for the other. Maybe I did too once, mistaking success for love. Parents spend their lives trying to build something their children can stand on, forgetting that sometimes the higher you build, the easier it is for them to forget the ground beneath them. When I closed my eyes, I saw flashes of him as a kid, sitting in the passenger seat of my old pickup, his legs too short to reach the floor, holding the company keychain and pretending he ran the plant, falling asleep with a welding helmet beside his bed. Somewhere along the way, that boy vanished into a man who valued image over effort. Maybe that's my fault too. I whispered into the quiet, "You're still my son, but I can't save you from yourself." At 8:47 p.m., I wrote my final note. In the ledger, just 5 words, "Forgive without forgetting the lesson." And then I closed it and tucked it back in the safe beside the trust papers. The phone buzzed once. Another email from Connor. Found a job out west. Small firm. Starting over. No apology this time. Just a statement of fact. But it was enough. Sometimes the first step toward redemption doesn't need an audience. I replied, "Do the work right. Don't forget where you came from. No signature, no lecture, just the truth. Plain and simple." Outside, the night deepened. Cleveland's skyline shimmered faintly beyond the snow. Somewhere the factory lights blinked like tired eyes still awake after a long shift. I raised my mug slightly toward them. a small toast to everything lost and everything earned. If anyone ever asks what revenge taught me, I'll tell them this. It's not about destroying the person who hurt you. It's about rebuilding the part of yourself they tried to take, and when you do, the silence that follows isn't empty. It's peace finally coming home. By Christmas week, Cleveland had settled into a hush. The air carried the faint bite of salt from the road and chimney smoke from 100 quiet homes. I walked through the plant that morning with no clipboard, no papers, no agenda, just memory. It was December 23rd, 2 weeks after the boardroom showdown. The welders had hung garlands along the mezzanine rail. Someone had taped a paper star above the time clock. The machine hum was softer, steadier. When I stopped by Tom's station, he grinned, handing me a wrapped box of chocolates. "From all of us," he said. "Never thought we'd see the day this place laughed again." "Neither did I said. Later that day, I met Mark and Frank for lunch at a diner on West 117th, the kind of place where the floor creaks and the waitress calls everyone Hon. Frank had already ordered coffee for all three of us. "Connor signed the separation," he said, sliding the papers across the booth table. "He's walking away clean, no lawsuits, no press. He's out." Mark nodded, eyes tired but proud. "You did the impossible, Rob. Most men your age don't fight back. They fade out." I smiled faintly. I didn't fight back. I just stopped handing out second chances. They laughed softly, and for the first time in months, I joined in. The sound felt strange, almost foreign, like something borrowed returning home. By evening, I was back at the bungalow. The tree in the corner was small, plastic, and older than half the men at the plant. It still worked. I decorated it with Ellen's old ornaments, each one a small story. The brass gear from our first production line, the tiny angel she made from scrap metal, the picture frame holding Connor's kindergarten photo. His smile in that picture was all hope, all future. I placed that ornament front and center, not to forget but to remember how we began. Around 9 p.m, my phone buzzed, a new message from Connor. "Merry Christmas, Dad, hope you're warm. I'm doing okay." I stared at it a while, thumb hovering over the keyboard. Then I typed, "Merry Christmas, son, keep doing okay." That's how it starts. I pressed send and set the phone down. Some things, I realized, didn't need grand reconciliations. Just acknowledgement. Just a single, steady bridge built quietly across the wreckage. Outside, snow began to fall again. The kind of gentle snow that doesn't threaten to bury. It blankets, forgives. I poured myself a cup of tea, not bourbon, and sat by the window with the blue mug in my hands. Through the glass, I could see the faint orange glow of the factory in the distance, still alive, still mine. The company's new motto, "Built to last," hung on the gate now. Fitting, I thought, not just for steel, but for people too. I leaned back in the chair, letting the warmth from the cup settle into my fingers. Ellen would have loved this version of the story, the one where justice didn't end with rage, but restoration. Where legacy didn't die in bitterness, but breathed again in truth. The clock struck 10 p.m. The furnace kicked on one last time for the night, humming low and calm. I closed my eyes and whispered into the stillness. Maybe the world doesn't reward kindness right away, but it never forgets who earned it. Then I smiled. Just once, because I knew I wasn't homeless. I was finally home. There's a kind of silence that only comes when a storm has finished proving its point. By January 5th, Cleveland had thawed just enough for the snow to turn to grey slush. The holidays were over, and life was back to its slow grind. But for me, everything had changed. Not louder, just clearer. Halloran fabrication was running smoother than it had in years. Orders were coming in steady, new contracts signed, morale high. I'd officially reinstated Anita as HR director and given Tom a small bonus for keeping the crew steady through the chaos. When I passed through the shop floor, they didn't stop to salute me anymore. They just nodded with that quiet respect that says, "We remember what you did, and we'll take it from here." Friday, January 9th, 2:22 p.m. I was reviewing invoices when an envelope arrived. Handwritten, no return address. Inside was a photo. Connor and a small group of men in work jackets standing in front of a modest sign, Midwest Steelworks, Fort Wayne, Indiana. Scribbled on the back in his handwriting were 6 words, building something the right way now. I stared at it for a long time. Not sadness, not even pride. Just that deep, quiet understanding that maybe the hardest lessons are the ones that finally set a person free. I placed the photo on my desk beside Ellen's picture. 2 generations of builders, both learning what it means to start again. Later that evening, I walked through the factory one last time before closing up for the weekend. The air smelled of machine oil and hot steel, the scent of continuity. Sparks flickered in the welding bay, casting brief orange glows across the concrete. I stopped at the main switchboard and ran my hand over the cold metal, whispering, "Still here." Outside, the sun dipped low, throwing long shadows across the snowbanks. For the first time since this all began, I felt no bitterness toward my son. What was broken had taught me where the cracks were. In him, in me, in the foundation of what we'd both built on pride. I walked back to my truck, breath fogging in the cold, and watched the sky fade to a pale blue-gray. The world didn't care who'd been right or wrong. It only cared that work got done, that promises got kept, that people showed up when it mattered. When I reached home, the house greeted me with its familiar creaks and hums. The blue mug sat clean on the counter. I filled it with tea, carried it to the window, and looked out at the factory lights, glowing faintly in the distance. I thought about all the noise that had once filled this space. Shouting, accusations, guilt, and how somehow it had been replaced with stillness. That's what real revenge gives you when it's done right. Not celebration, not applause. Just peace that doesn't need defending anymore. Before heading to bed, I opened the ledger one last time. On the final page, under the old entries of dates and dollar amounts, I wrote a single sentence in thick, slow handwriting. Power means nothing if you forget who you built it for. I underlined it once, closed the book, and slid it into the safe. As I turned off the kitchen light, I looked at Ellen's photo on the wall. For a split second, in the dim glow of the furnace light, it felt like she was smiling back. Maybe the world calls it revenge. I call it remembering what home really means. Because in the end, I never lost my house. He just lost his way.